Good afternoon. Welcome to the October 12, 2017 meeting of the City County Planning Board. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast live by Winston-Salem TV Digital Media. It will be rebroadcast at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning and again at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Our first order of business today is the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless a planning board member asks a question. For general use district zoning, the planning board must consider the full range of uses allowed in the district. Therefore, the petitioner may not refer to a specific use for the property. For special use district zoning, however, you must be very specific about the intended use or uses of the site and details on how the site will be developed. Items under Section B of the agenda require final action by either the City Council or County Commissioners. As such, votes taken today will go to those bodies for their consideration. If you are addressing the board today, before you begin your remarks, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. First order of business is the approval of 4 sets of minutes, August 24, September 14, 25, and 28. Are there any additions, corrections to those minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Grubb, second by Mr. Leake. In discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Now call on Aaron King to present our consent agenda.
All right, first item is item B1. It's zoning docket W3346, and this is a request to rezone about 25 acres from highway business to general business limited use zoning. And this is the Marketplace Mall property on the east side of Peters Creek Parkway. You can see it shown in yellow there on the map. I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with this site. So again, this is for GBL zoning. The petitioner is requesting all the uses allowed in the GB district with the exception of about 9 uses, some of the more objectionable uses. Fuel dealer, correctional institution, dirt storage, adult establishment, the LCID uses, things of that nature. So they've excluded those from their request. And they have also agreed to a condition for the existing greenway that's up in that northeast corner of the site. The greenway is already there. However, we don't have the proper easements in place. So the applicant has agreed to dedicate the easements to formalize that and correct that issue. Staff has reviewed this. The area plan does recommend commercial for this site, and we believe the GBL zoning is reasonable here, and we would recommend approval of this request.
Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed. What's the pleasure of the board?
I had a question, Aaron. Manufacturing A would be added by this change?
Correct.
What can you do in manufacturing A compared to other manufacturing?
In this case, that's actually the use that's driving this, and it's the bakery use, a large-scale bakery use, a production bakery use, and that's what's driving this. But essentially, assembly, production of products indoors, so you wouldn't see anything outdoors. It would be entirely in the existing structure.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Anyone care to make a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Motion, Mr. Brown, second. Mr. Younger, any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, so if you don't mind, we'll talk about items B2 and B3 sort of at the same time. It's the same project. However, we've got 2 separate zoning cases because of the split jurisdiction of this site. So this, you can see on the map, item B2 is zoning docket W3348, and item B3 is zoning docket F1570. So the yellow portion is in the city limits, that's W3348, and the pink portion is within the county's jurisdiction. Again, same project, same site plan. So the subject property is a little bit over 15 acres in size, and this request would rezone the subject property from RS9 to RM8S, residential multifamily, 8 dwelling units per acre, special use zoning, and the proposed use is life care community. So you can see the subject property. It's on the south side of Clemensville Road. It's east of Everett Road and west of Old Salisbury Road, which are just out of this image. You can see the surrounding development pattern in the area. It's RS9 zoning, predominantly single-family homes. There is an existing church just to the west of the subject property. You can see there with the mouse. This is the site plan that's been submitted with this request, and it's oriented a little bit differently. So Clemensville Road would be to the right of this image here. The single-family subdivision, the Bethany Trace neighborhood that's adjoining is just to the south, to the bottom of this image where you can see the mouse there. And that church I showed you previously would be to the top of this image. So to kind of walk through the site plan again, this is for a life care community. It's for 124 total units. That comes out to about 8 units per acre. One access point off of Clemensville Road that would come in and serve this site, and one connection to Paragon Drive, which is in the subdivision, the single-family subdivision to the east of this property. We would have a connection there. The streets are private within. We'll come back to that in a second. But to the notch out here of this property, that's where the larger three-story buildings will be located. They're located intentionally over closer to the church property. And then we've got the 1 and 2 unit buildings that are located in the long rectangular portion of the site closer to the existing single-family homes. You do have that private street network that serves them here. You would have a perimeter buffer yard, a 30-foot type 2 perimeter buffer yard around the entire site. And they're trying to save as much existing vegetation along those single-family homes as they can. They would have to supplement that in areas where they don't quite meet the buffer requirements. Life care communities do have to meet PRD requirements, so they do have their thoroughfare open space up along Clemensville Road. They do have the appropriate amount of passive open space, and staff would commend them on locating their active open space in the form of these central greens, so that all of these 1 and 2 unit dwellings would look out on these active open spaces that are kind of common in there. So staff believes that's a good location for them. The only comment staff would make on this is these are private streets. Paragon Drive is a public road that stubs into this property, so that works. There would be a gate located here, and again, these would be private streets. Staff's only comment is we don't really have a problem with the private street nature of that. We would recommend a public access easement that would prohibit that gate there so that service delivery vehicles, buses, mail trucks, UPS trucks could go from neighborhood to neighborhood without having to go back out to Clemensville Road, get on there and go to the next neighborhood. It allows better connectivity through the neighborhoods. So I think you would have seen that comment in the staff report. Other than that, the site plan does meet UDO requirements. When we evaluated this against the area plan does recommend residential 0 to 8 dwelling units per acre. This is up towards the higher end of that. It is 8 dwelling units per acre. And with that, staff would recommend approval of this request, both requests.
Okay. No one has signed up for either one of these. Anyone here opposed to this recommendation? So no one, I'll declare the public hearing closed. We probably need to take a vote separate right there on the two of them. So, so we'll deal with, was the city W3348 first? Is anyone?
Yeah, can I have a question?
Sure.
Any kind of signage or property that's going to, or building or structure that's going to be put on this first part, which is the city part that we're talking about now?
No, there's, I think, a community garden up there. There's an island there. There may be an entrance. Gary's got the larger site plan. There may be an entrance signage, I would think, out on Clemensville, but no buildings per se.
Is that what that is showing that signage element?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
That's within our regulations and
Yes.
everything like that, along the way with that. This is a curve coming through there. Are they doing some things with the road there?
They are. They're installing a left turn lane and a right decel slip lane and sidewalks along Clemensville Road.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned that this is residential, but in the south plan or whatever it was that was in it, wasn't it supposed to be single family though?
Predominantly single family.
Yeah.
Again, when we looked at this, it is multifamily. It kind of has an institutional feel to it. And when we look at area plans, we don't specifically call out sites for institutional. So given that it is a life care community, we felt that, given Legacy's recommendations for allowing folks to age in place, that this seemed like a reasonable and appropriate location, especially given the design that they offered up here to try to respect those single family homes to the east.
And let me just add a couple other things. First of all, the site plan shows those dwellings that are closest to the homes on Paula Drive being pulled back. If this were left RS9 and developed as a single-family subdivision, you could get homes a lot closer to those homes on Paula Drive with that. The other thing I'll point out is that the traffic generation with this type of use is much, much less than single-family. It would generate probably half of the total amount of traffic than a regular single-family subdivision would be doing. So.
And I know this neighborhood area fairly well. My personal preference is to see two entrances into areas like this that have so many residents in there. And I don't know what difference it makes that people are over 55. I think that's a perfect age to drive and have several cars, you know. But I don't know what the neighborhood's feeling is about Paragon Drive being open. I mean, that is a very residential street. There are kids that play and everything like that in that area. But, I mean, if the residents felt good about it, I'd feel good about being sure that that was a thoroughfare to that neighborhood. I just don't know where the developer's at on that, or whether he got a feel at the community meeting on that.
I'll let Scott Miller, he's with the development group, I'll let him come up and speak to that if you don't mind.
Good afternoon, Scott Miller, President of MLA Design Group, 120 Club Oaks Court, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Thank you. Yeah, we actually had a neighborhood meeting that was well attended. We had 25 or 30 folks there. And there was some discussion about connection through Paragon Drive, and that's one of the things that led us to the gate at that rear location. Number one, the developer really preferred not to make that connection originally, just to keep the traffic flow at a minimum through his development. But at the same time, we understood the need to make the connection from a fire service and safety standpoint. So the kind of the compromise and the way that that most of the residents, I don't want to speak for all of them, but most of the residents that brought up questions about that really liked the idea of the gated component. So really, actually staff had asked us about that prior to this meeting, and we told them that we pretty much obligated to the residents next door that we would place that gate there unless forced to do otherwise. So that's why it's still on the plan.
But
right
I
now.
will add to that Paragon Drive itself, we feel that it's very important to extend that from the stub street, because you have other land that is undeveloped beyond there, and we really do need to have better connectivity in this community. So to not extend Paragon Drive, I think, would be a big planning mistake.
Yeah. So we have maintained that connection through.
Yeah, well, that satisfies me.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I had a question for Aaron. Going back to the recommendations of the area plan, do you see this zoning change as in any way encouraging more multifamily in an area that wasn't originally envisioned in the plan, or not?
I don't, personally, I don't see it. You know, if you look at this location map, the church is directly adjacent to this site. It owns a pretty large parcel there. You've got scattered single family back kind of to the southwest in this area. I personally don't see it. Paul, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, the fact you have special use zoning and it calls out this specific use of life care community and it has the site plan there, I think that's the thing that kind of makes it clear that we're not just approving any old multifamily zoning request. We're doing a restricted one that has these kind of characteristics to it.
In the time I've been here, I haven't had anybody approach me about multifamily in this area. A lot of that pool is further east on Peters Creek Parkway. You've seen on Peters Creek and on Stafford Village. That seems to be where the multifamily activity is focused.
Any other questions? Anyone care to make a motion?
Move approved. Second.
Motion by Mr. Grubb, second Mr. Younger. In discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. All right, now we'll deal with F 1570, the Forsyth County portion of this same case.
Move approval. Second.
Motion, Mr. Grubb, second by Mr. Younger. Any discussion on this one? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous also. Thank you.
All right. Next item's B4, zoning docket W 3349. And this is a request to rezone about 7.2 acres from residential single-family quadruplex, residential multifamily 5 units per acre, and institutional and public to institutional and public limited use zoning. And you can see the subject property there on both sides of Spring Street between Wachovia Street and Academy Street. This is the Salem Baptist Church campus. So you can see a very mixed variety of zoning in this area. So if you take the northern half of this site, where their main buildings are, everything kind of between Bank Street and Wachovia Street is already zoned institutional and public, except for one lot that's zoned RM5. When you look at the southern half of this site, its current zoning is there's a little pocket of RSQ, and then the balance of their site is zoned RM5, kind of between that Bank Street line and Academy Street. When they have submitted this IPL zoning, they actually reduced that list of proposed uses significantly down from what is allowed in the IP district. So I think you'll see that in your staff report. They have also agreed to and volunteered a condition to prohibit electronic message board signs, so staff commends them for that as well. When staff reviewed this, the area plan recommends the vast majority of this for institutional and public, pretty much the majority of the northern half of this and the RM5 piece here to the south. It does show some residential zoning for this one pocket of RSQ. Staff does believe this is a reasonable request. It would consolidate their property under one zoning district, one IPL request, and we believe it's generally consistent with the zoning pattern in the area and the area plan. I know these folks have had several meetings with the surrounding neighborhood. I believe they've had 3 going back to March and April, and more recently again in August. So we commend them again for good neighborhood outreach with the surrounding neighborhoods, and we would recommend approval of this request.
No one has signed up. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? So no one, declared the public hearing closed.
Move for approval. Move for approval.
Second. Motion by Mr. Younger, second by Mr. Brian. Any discussion?
Yeah, I had a question, Aaron. It said in the staff report that there were a couple of properties that were contributing to the historic district, and I was wondering if the HRC needed to review this, or did they review it?
So those comments came from Michelle McCullough, and I actually went and spoke with her before this meeting. It's a National Register district. If they want to make any modifications to those buildings, there's no additional review that takes place. It's simply come in and get permits and meet UDO requirements and building code requirements. So again, it is a National Register district. But those comments come from our Historic Resources staff.
Okay.
Any other questions? We have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B6. That's UDO 281. That's a text amendment that's been proposed by planning staff that deals with limited campus uses, and that's been continued at several of your previous meetings. Staff has requested another continuance, so that will automatically be continued to your November meeting. I just want to note that I believe the Neighborhood Alliance did want some additional time to react to what Wake Forest had made some comments and some suggestions, so I believe there was some time needed for that. And we will also be talking about this at your October work session. But for today's purposes, this item is automatically continued. Next item is C1. This is zoning docket W 3347. This is a special use permit request for a transmission tower in RS9 zoning, and this is on the Twin City Bible Church campus on the east side of Everett Street, north of Silas Creek Parkway. You can see the subject property there in yellow, and again, this is for a 150-foot tall stealth tower, concealed tower. It'd be a slick stick. So you can see the subject property, the existing church building there, kind of in the northwest corner. The surrounding zoning pattern is primarily RS9 for single-family homes. The proposed tower would go, it's approximately 270 feet from this common property line with the homes on Miller Street. So, and it would be south of the existing church building, so just approximating somewhere in this area here, if you can follow the mouse. And this is the site plan that's been submitted with this request. So again, to get you oriented, Everett Street would be to the left in this image. The existing church building would be in this area. The existing access point onto Everett Street and parking area comes in and then runs north and south. And the proposed tower would go in this location here between the edge of parking and the existing stormwater pond that's located on the eastern portion of the site there. So again, as I mentioned, 150-foot tall concealed tower. It would have a type 4 buffer yard around the entire perimeter of the compound there, except for where the gates are located. It would have the proposed faux wood fence to kind of screen that area, so even where the gate is shown, it would still have something so you wouldn't be able to see directly into the compound. In your book, I think you'll have the photo simulations, so those should have been in your agenda packets. So just to kind of recap the process for today's purposes, this is a planning board review, so we're just looking at site plan and meeting site plan requirements. This will go forward to City Council at their November meeting as an elected body special use permit, where a public hearing will take place and testimony will be given on each side of this, and City Council will base their decision based upon what was discussed at that meeting. So again, for today's purposes, this is a planning board review item. Staff recommends approval of this request.
Aaron, I just wanted to clarify, I think this is what you said, I just wanted to make sure that the access to this is already there. In other words, there's an existing driveway. They would not be putting in a new driveway?
Correct, yes, they would use the existing access that serves the church currently. No new access points onto Everett Street would be contemplated with this.
Any other questions?
Look, is the developer or the cell tower company here?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess my only question about this, and whether if it fits into the what we've heard, is that when the community was presented with the fact that we needed more cell towers and more cell capability, there was discussion that these cell capabilities could be put within existing structures where appropriate. And this almost is, I mean, you know, line drive right behind a steeple there. Was there no way to incorporate that into a rebuilt steeple or something along those lines?
It just wouldn't, structurally, it would not work to do that. And this also allows for not only one company to use the tower, but multiple companies to use it. And sometimes if you use a steeple scenario, you're limiting yourself to just one company using it. And, you know, there'll be companies from customers from multiple carriers within a given area.
Well, it's just a disappointment to me that when we had a opportunity like this, that we couldn't take advantage of that.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it won't fit within the existing structure. So really, the only choice you have is to build an alternative structure. And under the ordinance, it is a stealth structure that fits the requirements of the ordinance.
If you would, give us your name and address for the record. That's okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Mr. King, Tom Johnson. I'm with the law firm of Nexus Pruitt, and I represent the applicant for this tower, which is Communications Tower Group. And my address is 4141 Park Lake Avenue, Suite 200 in Raleigh.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We need a motion. Anyone?
I move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Younger, second Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, next item is D1. This is subdivision 2017-083, and this is for about 7 acres on the south side of Briar Cliff Road, southwest of Reynolda Road. And you can see the subject property there in yellow. It contains an existing single-family home up near the Briar Cliff Road frontage. And this is the proposed site plan that's been submitted with this request. It's for a 21-lot conventional subdivision, so we're not talking about a PRD and open space and things of that nature. What we're looking at is to make sure all the lots are a minimum of 9,000 square feet in size and 65 feet in lot area. And this plan demonstrates compliance with that. So to walk you through, this is the Briar Cliff Road portion up at the top of the screen. There'd be a new public road that would come in and head to the south, and then another one that would head back to the east that serves the southern portion of that site. Again, both public roads. Stormwater, there's a proposed stormwater pond located in the southern portion of that on the south side of Deacon Village Court. When we looked at this at interdepartmental review, I know our stormwater staff had some concerns because that stormwater pond is generally in that area, and it's going to outlet somewhere in between 2 of the existing homes on Waterford Road. So our stormwater staff had proposed an additional condition there above what's required by the ordinance to try to mitigate some of those impacts. So that's included with this request, and the developer has agreed to that. So with this, again, all the lots do meet 9,000 square feet in size. They do have the 65-foot lot width, and staff would recommend approval of this subdivision.
Move approval. Second.
Motion, Mr. Grubb, second, Mr. Lee.
Question.
Yes.
I know we have had problems in this subdivision with water. And so did you get a sense that those kinds of things are going to be handled? I mean, this is the newest grade, I guess. Mr. Huff can answer that. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Bryan, we are aware of the stormwater issues in this neighborhood as well, and we're acutely concerned with the outfalling of the water between the two residential structures. Adding of the 50-year event enhances the level of protection with the stormwater control, but it does not do away with the quote-unquote sins of the past. So while it tries to hold the line, they will still see effects. The WEEP, the 2 to 5 day drawdown from the device, that will still be something that the residents do see as a result of this.
And so explain to me how that water will travel between those residents.
That's a good question. We see on the site plan that there's a drainage easement for a sanitary sewer. We're assuming that the stormwater outfall will parallel that sanitary sewer drainage easement and then make its way into the right-of-way down grading.
Now, re-explain to me in the public what a 50-year flood really means.
Okay, it's all probability-based. So a 100-year storm has a 1% probability of occurring in any given year. 50-year event is half that. So basically, you have a probability of basically 2% of that storm occurring in any given year. But Mother Nature could send 2 50-year events in 1 year period.
How many 50 years have we had in the last 10 years?
We've had 2 50-year storms in the last 7 years in this area.
Okay. So they're going to expect some water to pass between their houses.
They will,
Yeah.
regardless of the storm event. If you get a significant rainfall, it will outfall in a 2 to 5 day time period through those two properties there.
And then that drains down into the lakes that are in Town and Country?
It's going to hit a right-of-way drainage system, and I haven't tracked the topography all through the neighborhood for this site, but it's going to hit a right-of-way drainage system. Then ultimately, I believe you're correct, that it hits one of the lakes.
And then eventually down to Mill Creek?
Yes.
And that swampy area down there or whatever?
Correct.
Okay. And did we get any comment from the neighbors about that, or any concern? Well, that means they don't have a chance to talk about that.
So I think the developer,
Sorry.
I think the developer did have a neighborhood
Yeah.
meeting just out of
Oh, just
courtesy
out
to
of
the,
pure-
just
good.
that, even though it wasn't
Oh, that's very
required,
good.
they did reach
Okay.
out to the neighborhood and have a meeting to
Good.
explain this plan with the neighborhoods. I can't comment on what was said,
Right.
but I know that outreach was made.
Sorry.
Okay.
I had a question about, it said that they might be required to have a homeowners association to maintain the pond. Will they be required, or is that still a possibility only?
Yes, for the new rules type facility, they're going to have some type of homeowners association because they will have to pay into a surety. They will have to front load an escrow account and populate that over time, so they will have to have an HOA.
Okay, and should there be significant flooding to those two properties, the ones that are not in the subdivision, the ones
The
where the,
receiving properties.
would the city be involved in potentially mitigating that with them, or?
It depends on the adverse impact that they're having. The city does have a 70-30 cost share policy if they have severe erosion of a drainage way, flooding of their dwelling, or imminent danger to their dwelling. But it is a cost share, so they would have to, number one, meet city council approval, and number two, they would have to contribute to the cost if a significant solution could be established there.
Any other questions? I believe we do have a motion on the floor. Those in favor? Any opposed? You opposed?
Yes.
To the site plan? Okay.
Okay. Next item is item E1, or just E, I guess, is on the agenda. This is an alternative compliance request in the Winston Overlay District. So you can see the property that we're talking about there is on the north side of 4th Street in between Poplar and Spruce Streets. It's just south of the existing GMAC building. So the intent of this project would be to remove that smaller portion of the GMAC building and that surface parking lot that you see there and replace that with a 5 to 6 story multifamily building. So this is the site plan that you have in your agenda packet. So it's oriented a little differently. So the GMAC building will be to the left in this image, Spruce and Poplar, and then 4th Street would be over to the right in this image. And I realize it's hard to make anything out on this drawing. The point of this is just to show you that essentially that back portion of the building, the surface parking lot, would go away, and the entire portion left over would be developed with an existing building that would take up the remainder of that space. So the WO district requires that at least 70% of the street frontage there have a 0-foot setback, so the building would have to be pulled all the way up to the property line. This building, the building does not meet those requirements, so we'll kind of walk through the different frontages here. At the top, you've got Poplar Street, and that red line represents the existing property line there. So you can see the buildings do come close to it, within probably 5 or so feet in some places, and no more than 10 or so feet at their furthest extent, but they don't quite meet that 0-foot required setback. What is proposed by the developer does, staff size does a good thing. It provides some articulation on that building to kind of break up that large facade. It allows for some green space to be located between that front building wall and the sidewalk. It allows for a little bit wider sidewalk and some existing vegetation to go in on Poplar Street. So while it does not meet the requirements of the ordinance, staff believes that it fulfills the intent of what the WO district is in place for. Kind of the same thing along 4th Street, but a little different facade. It does come close, very close in this one point, and juts back a little further in others. So again, here you can see about an 18-foot wide sidewalk from the back of curb to the front building wall. So again, on 4th Street, where you have a lot of pedestrian traffic, staff believes having that additional width is a good thing. So again, some additional plantings going on 4th Street. But again, it does bring the building up extremely close to the property line. And then on Spruce, a little bit different dynamic here. So you can see the main building wall, and you do have residences on that side that would access Spruce Street. So you can see the door there. You would come out. There would be steps in this area to a landing, and then you're out to Spruce Street. So again, in this area, we do have a wider pedestrian access point. We do have some green space. And the building is reasonably close to, again, probably within 5 feet or so of that property line. So with respect to the first part of this alternative compliance request, although it does not meet the 0-foot setback, staff believes that this completely fulfills the requirements and the intent of the WO district. Staff would also point out this is an entire block, so it's not like we're cutting into an existing block further east on 4th Street and disrupting a street pattern there. This is kind of its own block. So based on those characteristics, staff does recommend approval of the alternative compliance for the building setback. And we have a second portion of this request. The WO district has provisions that basically say if you've got a ground floor unit, it's got to be elevated at least 3 feet from street level. And so this is really important on the Spruce Street side. That's the only area it comes into play at. This is just an image to show you the overall facade of that Spruce Street side. And if you look at this, if you can follow the mouse there, you're seeing the existing road grade. So this would be coming down from 5th Street in this area. You'd be walking downhill down towards 4th Street. So you can see the existing grade is kind of fallen from north to south there. Where that's particularly impactful is for these 2 units in this area that is circled in yellow. And you can see a blow up of that on the bottom of this slide. So the 2 units there, the closest is, you can see the measurement of 6 inches. So basically it's at road grade at that point. As you come further down the hill, we get to 1 foot 6 inches. So again, as I told you, the requirement is 3 feet. In those 2 areas, they're not quite meeting that. Staff is comfortable with this alternative compliance in this situation, specifically because of the topography that exists that they're fighting, and there's really not a reasonable solution to get around that. And it also, as I showed you on that previous plan, that part of the building is set back a little further to give them the privacy that was really intended or meant for by that 3-foot high building separation. So with respect to both parts of this alternative compliance request, staff would recommend approval.
Thank you.
Can I have some questions?
Sure.
When did we approve that overlay?
Was probably 10 years ago, about.
No, the one, the newest one where we're talking about up to the street.
Oh, the Martin Luther, you talking about the change to the Martin
Yeah,
Luther King
no,
overlay?
to the downtown,
To the, just last year.
just last year.
Right.
Is this the first request for variance?
We had a previous request for alternative compliance that was done before that text amendment, but since the most recent WO text amendment, this is the first request, I believe. Yeah.
So the issue on street level is only on the side streets?
It's only on those 2 units on the Spruce Street side. Every other,
Just on the Spruce Street side?
Right.
Do you or do I need to ask the developer whether there are issues that might keep them, like, I don't know, balconies or whatever, from coming up and fulfilling that street?
Yeah. Christie, I don't know if you want to come up and answer that one from the developer's behalf.
Represent BB&M Architecture. Name is Nick Barnes, 1435 West Moorhead Street, Suite 160, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28208.
Mr. Barnes, what I'm looking at, particularly on 4th Street, because, you know, everything's right up to the street. And I was trying to remember the building that was in that parking lot before it was a parking lot, and I'm sure I should remember that, but I'm stretching. Was there some architectural reason why you couldn't pull it up to the sidewalk?
Well, we felt like trying to build a good pedestrian experience and creating some ins and outs and articulation of the building facade will help us on the upper floors stack our units appropriately for constructability, but on the lower level provide opportunities for shadow and shade and more comfortable spaces on the exterior of the building. So creating that jog creates also some refuge areas, if you will, for pedestrians that are passing one another to feel a little more separated from traffic. I certainly understand the intent of being up on the urban edge. I think we're staying within that intent by using some planters that come out a little bit closer to the street. So we're just trying to create some layers and buffer to make the front of our building feel a little more pedestrian scaled.
And I think in the case of 4th Street, they are actually extending the sidewalk into the development there. Sidewalk's not really that wide right there now.
That's true.
I mean, yeah, so I think it's helpful to have a building of this mass that has a little bit more sidewalk created to it. And when you think about 4th Street, you have some other blocks that have a little wider sidewalk, even in the areas where the city did the streetscape there.
Yeah. Okay, so there isn't any architectural reason why you can't do it. It's just, it was a preference.
It is more of a preference, but yes, it is also following a bit of the stack of the unit plans that are above, so there are some constructability issues. It comes down to just clean detailing on those first 2 levels of the building. That's where our scale feels best for a pedestrian, so it allows us to have a little cleaner detail down on that level.
Thank you. Let me ask another question, Mr. King. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. King, do we have anyone from the, you know, as this overlay was presented, it was presented with heavy support by the partnership. In fact, it was helped to be designed from that. Do we have any correspondence from the partnership or anybody from the partnership here today saying we agree that, you know, within a year we're going to have a variance on this and we feel okay about this?
I don't know if anybody from the development team has reached out to the partnership. I'm not aware of anybody here today on their behalf.
I got a call from Jason Thiel the other day. He was
Okay.
very complimentary of this development.
So you feel like he's in agreement with this?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go through with him
Compliance.
the specifics of, well, you know, they're asking for a variance from the Winston overlay there, but again, he was fully part of our effort to do this text amendment, including the alternate compliance there. So I'm pretty confident that they're very supportive of this project and how it's been planned.
Yeah, and I'm very supportive of the project. I just am, you know, anytime we we spend all this time and get information from the staff about why not to do this, and then we turn around and do it. That concerns me.
But keep in mind, these are very minor details on this, and that's precisely the reason why we wanted to have some alternate compliance in there, knowing that every site within the Winston overlay doesn't have even topography, has little unique characteristics. We did the same thing for the Hampton Inn couple years ago.
Remember.
Same issues of articulation of the building along the sidewalk there. So I think when you're talking about something of that minor amount of variance, I think we're very willing to work with the developer, find out why they're needing to do this. But since in the case of such a minor variance, I don't think we at least planning staff-wise have an issue with that.
No, if the partnership is for it, I mean, they were the main drive behind this, I feel good about that.
So are you making a motion to approve it then?
I'm making the motion to approve it.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lee. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, Brian Wilson will be making the first presentation.
Good evening, members of the board. This is case W3350. I believe that's item B5. The petitioner of Enclave Land Holdings, LLC. It's a 16.73 acre site located on the west side of Betania Station Road, just south of Chatelawn Drive in the North Ward. Petitioner is requesting a site plan amendment to modify the Phase 2 area of the enclave, zoned RM12S, by replacing previously approved townhouse units with three-story apartment buildings. Our subject property is in GMA3, that's suburban neighborhoods, North Ward. We have our area map. Subject property is, of course, highlighted in yellow. You can see the residential zone properties to the west and north here on James Street, as well as to the south here. Some more intense zoning districts to the east, the LI, RMU, and LO across Betania Station Road. And here's our aerial showing the undeveloped portion of the property. You can see the high power lines, high tension power lines transecting the southern portion of that property. And the North Suburban Area Plan update does recommend intermediate density residential for this property. Just to give you a better idea of the layout, this is a Google map view of the subject property. North is to the right. This is Chatelawn Drive and Betania Station Road here. This is the existing Phase 1 portion of the enclave with the James Street right here. And then, of course, that cut for the high tension power lines right here. We are looking west into the Phase 1 of the enclave. The subject property is to the left here. We are looking south towards the subject property from Villa Club Drive. As you can see, it's partially graded, but mostly wooded. Here we are on Betania Station Road. The subject property is kind of on the other side of the road there. See the existing overhead power lines. And this is a little bit closer up towards Chatelawn Drive. Chatelawn Drive would be to the right there. We're looking into the Phase 1 portion of the subject property from Betania Station Road. And this is on the other side, looking south along James Street, so the subject property would be in the background here. And we did have two site plans, or one site plan submitted, and we got it zoomed in. So they're proposing an amendment to add these 4 apartment buildings, and then we have the clubhouse here. They're proposing interconnected interconnectivity to Villa Club Drive with a driveway onto Betania Station Road here. We are going to be asking for an enhanced street yard along Betania Station Road with sidewalk and curb and gutter. We also will be asking them to widen Betania Station Road. I believe it's 18 feet from center, and dedicate additional right-of-way. The southern portion of the site is not in this request at this time. They're going to leave that currently undeveloped. You can see the tree safe area in the southwestern portion of the site. Just for reference, this was the originally approved site plan, W2755, and back in 2005. You can see that this was originally all townhouse units and was fully developed all the way up to the James Street portion. Proposed elevations for those apartments, three-story apartment buildings. In our analysis, Legacy 2030 does recommend appropriate infill development on serviceable lands. The development would provide an appropriate transitional development area between high-intensity and low-intensity districts. And the proposed impervious surface coverage is significantly below the originally approved plan. This proposed development will generate less traffic than the originally approved plan, as of course they're bringing fewer units in this particular amendment. Our recommendation is approval. The site plan does meet UDO requirements.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions of staff at this time?
Yeah, I have a question for staff. The townhome units, are those owner-occupied or are they rental units?
The existing townhouse units that were built in Phase 1 appear to be rental. They're all on the site, located on one parcel.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I had a question, Mr. Wilson. Will there be a Phase 3 of this on that undeveloped area by the power lines? Is that envisioned?
So, Brian, if you don't mind, so we did have discussions with the developer on that. At this time, it appears not. They're showing that existing vegetation to remain, and that's where their tree save area is. They're not showing any development. Should they come back at some point in the future and wish to do that, it would be a site plan amendment that would come right back through the same process that we're here for today.
Okay, and I had another question about the stormwater pond, which was listed as conceptual, and I don't quite understand what that means. What's the status of that pond? Will it be there? Is this where the pond will be, or will it?
It might be good to let the proponents speak, and probably the designer can speak to that, and then if we need further clarification, I'd want Keith Huff to answer that question.
Could I ask a couple of questions to Ryan? Those last two bullets on your previous slide.
Sure.
Could you expand those a little bit? That there is less impervious?
So currently, because they're bringing the number of units down on
Okay.
the overall acreage, that's why the impervious coverage is below what was previously approved.
So there's less parking area?
So it's overall less parking area and fewer numbers of buildings. As you can see on the originally approved site plan, they had basically double the number of units
Okay.
on there. So because they're bringing in, they're going to be developing a smaller portion of this property, that's why this proposal for the site plan amendment has less impervious coverage.
And your last bullet? What was that? Let me see if that was answered.
So
Generate because
again,
less
that's the same reason,
units.
because
Okay.
there'd be fewer units
Okay.
than was originally.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Okay. Mr. Dickey?
Good afternoon. Actually, the petitioner is here, and I've signed up for them, and I will let them give the bulk of their presentation at the front, so I believe I'll let them come up and give the presentation, as they were here. Yep.
Good afternoon, good evening. George Tullis, Miller Valentine Group, 1280 Whitlock Ridge Drive, Marietta, Georgia, 30064. Thanks for letting us be here today. You want to know about the project, is that what we're...
Anything you'd like to say?
I mean, I don't have anything to add. Staff's done a fantastic job. They've been great to work with, and we're looking forward to extending this project into Phase 2.
you like to address Ms. Duncan's question about the stormwater?
I would.
Okay.
The pond is listed as conceptual simply because until we get further into the process, we don't exactly know the configuration of the pond, its size, et cetera. So conceptual really means we don't know what will be there at the end of the day in terms of those things I just mentioned. But we will be providing stormwater pond. We have to.
Can I follow up on that, Mr.
Yes,
Sells? I imagine you've spent quite a bit of time around this development, and you may know some of the sensitivities of its location within Winston-Salem and within a watershed that has experienced constant overflowing. As a matter of fact, I think last time we covered a case that was on the same watershed, and I don't know whether the city was responsible for it or had to be responsible for it or not, but, you know, there's had to been an apartment building taken down because of the flooding down on Betania Road, and so we know there's going to be flooding. You've got an existing pond on there that's with the Phase 1. Have you looked at the potential engineering to bring that pond up to 2008 standards and it be a win-win for everybody? Because that pond is not in good shape. There's growth all in it and silt and things like that. In fact, we could get Ryan to go back and show a shot of that from the top. But did you look or think through, and maybe you have to go to Mr. Dickey on this, and to talk about the potential of actually upgrading and maintaining that?
I am going to defer to Mr. Dickey.
Okay.
That's really not my expertise at this
okay.
point, right?
In regards to the stormwater pond on the existing phase, we had not analyzed that into its current condition and looking at upgrading that to the conditions of, when it was developed back in 2005. So what we are proposing, of course, is doing the maintenance agreements and management for what is going to be on the second phase. That's kind of what all the funds are tied to for this project, was based on providing these 4 buildings, the clubhouse, and then whatever improvements would be needed for that. So then we're proposing, of course, then to provide a new pond for this new phase that meets the current standards of the ordinance.
So, I mean, is there any room to think about that? It is other land that you're going to be putting a stormwater pond on that is in a good location.
Yeah, one thing we did not study the drainage area. Most of that for that phase 1, of course, does go to the existing pond. Whether or not we can actually physically get the pond down on this side hasn't been determined. We have not looked at that.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna put that thought in your head as you look toward the engineering of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak in support of this, or do you have more questions?
Just had one more question about just the technical aspect of putting in the pond. So they haven't done the engineering yet to determine where the pond will go. My question is, should they conclude that the grade is not appropriate for a pond in that location and they have to put it somewhere significantly different than what's shown on the site plan, would they have to come back in for a change or not?
So I'll answer that one. So yes, if it's going to be in a substantially different location, if it shifts further closer towards those homes on James Street or in that area, yes. We actually have language that goes on the approval stamp on the plans that are approved by City Council that has that very language on it that says if stormwater pond significantly moves in some direction, it will at least be a staff change, and if it's more significant, it may be a site plan amendment. So there's that language that goes on every plan that we stamp, because we ran into that issue several years ago, and we put that on there as a disclaimer to folks.
Okay, yeah, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else like to speak in support of this? In support. Okay, we'll turn to the opposition. Ms. Dunstan?
I am Mrs. Cynthia Dunstan. I reside at 4080 Betania Station Road, adjacent to, I believe it's the power lines. I really wanted to find out exactly where they were going to put the buildings that they want to put, because I am right directly next to it, and they were talking about putting in a driveway. And at one point, they thought it was going to be right next to me, and we already have people come in our driveway to make a U-turn. So I'm quite concerned about that, and also the stormwater, because we do have a problem. We do have a problem with the water, and I didn't quite remember, or I don't think you were talking too fast, but I don't remember exactly how many units or apartments, are they going to be apartment homes, or how many would that be?
So it's 96 apartment units or multifamily units that are proposed with what's before the board today. It'd be a total of 96 in this request.
And if there would have been townhomes, how many would that have been? Ballpark.
I think what was shown on the previous remainder of the site on that 2005 plan was in the range of 200-ish, give or take in that range. So again, what's before you today is a significant decrease in the number of units from what City Council approved in 2005.
Next, if they think about phase 3, how will it have anything to do, where will it go next to where I'm talking about, which is right next to my home? That's
So let me pull something up on the PowerPoint here. I think I can maybe.
Well, point out her home.
So Ms. Dunstan has a single-family residence? Okay.
yes. Yes.
So if you look at this aerial image here, I believe your home is right here. It's the one directly abutting that south property line. Okay. And so if you, as Brian pointed out on his presentation, you've got those overhead power lines that kind of cut through the site there. Realistically speaking, the chance to fit anything in between those power lines in your home is extremely slim. Those power lines are a big obstacle to development on that southern portion of the site. So I believe that gives you some protection as far as what goes directly against your home.
And since the developers are here, we do keep those trees and stuff cut, so you might want to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
I'm sorry, thank you.
All right. Anyone else like to speak? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion for approval, and based on that, I think there's going to be significant improvement along Betania Road. That's going to neaten up a whole lot based on this design along there. But I would like to do a motion with a condition. And in our normal piece that was cited to us about what we have in our conditions, it states the developer shall have stormwater management study submitted for review by the Public Works Department. If required, an engineered stormwater management plan shall be submitted and approved by the Public Works. Relocation or installation of any stormwater treatment device into any buffer area of vegetation designated to remain or close proximity to adjacent residentially zoned land shall require staff change approval at minimum and may require site plan amendment. I would like to strike require a staff change approval at minimum and may, and that sentence to remain zone land shall require a site plan amendment. I think last time we were sort of caught unawares by that, and so I would like to see that come back since it's such a major effect on the tax base and what we're seeing in the future for that area if there is going to be a change. And I am in favor of seeing some changes there too along the way, so I make that motion.
Okay.
I would second that.
Motion by Mr. Brian, second by Ms. Dunnigan. Any discussion?
Is there a problem with taking what's a standard condition for all projects and changing it specific like this to bring it back before us?
No, that's,
Okay.
conditions are totally discretionary there, so, yeah.
does the petitioner need to agree to that change in that condition?
Yeah, the petitioner.
Sure.
Before the council approves.
Could I ask you, Mr. Bryan, to clarify again what it is you're?
Yeah, all I'm asking is that if something, the staff normally has the discretion to either approve it themselves without bringing it back.
Right.
And this is such a sensitive water basin area that's going to affect a whole lot of things, and I know that city council is going to be very concerned about it as well. So I would just assume us get that all clarified at the planning board level rather than waiting for the city council to have to deal through the details on that. So all I'm doing is saying if you've got a plan, if you follow the plan, it's going to go through. I mean, you know, whatever. But if you have to make any major changes, just bring it back to us.
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
clarification. What was the trigger
Yeah.
for the condition?
Yeah.
Understand. Thank you.
It's just a relocation of the pond, other than what's shown conceptually on the site plan, right?
Right. Just for my clarification for you, I didn't mean to mislead when I was saying it may differ. It's not going to differ substantially, as you well know. That's the only reason it shows conceptual.
Okay.
Thank you.
Staff, that.
Well,
change okay with-
and I'll just clarify for the board, when we look at potential staff changes, that's exactly what we look at. We look at whether the change is putting something closer to an adjacent neighborhood or it's changing access points or whatever, and if it does, or it's significantly increasing the intensity of development, those are all things that cause us to say, sorry, we can't do that as a staff change, you have to do a site plan amendment. So I think what Mr. Bryan just described is sort of how we approach the division between staff change and site plan amendment.
It's typically what we've been doing anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I feel a little uncomfortable setting a precedent for taking away that normal process within the staff of taking another review for anything that they could do as a staff change.
Well, let me.
Like I said, that's what they look at. I think you're looking at and it may be fine on the project, but I'm concerned about a precedent of saying staff is not able to do this in a way that would satisfy.
Like Paul described, I think we're going to get to the same spot whether we've got the condition or whether we don't, because again, if it's significant, we're going to say site plan amendment. More than likely, we're going to land in the same spot in the end, I would think.
Okay, and so I don't think this will be standard practice going forward, Ms. Smith. I think we're dealing with a particularly sensitive area of the community. So, okay. Any further discussion? We have a motion with that one change. All in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Good luck.
That brings us to UDO 283, and Kelly Bennett will be presenting that for you.
While we're waiting on that, who made the second on that last motion?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. UDO 283 is a petition to allow multifamily uses in the highway business and general office zoning districts and to remove the duplex and twin home uses from the general business zoning district. This text amendment was proposed in a report that staff presented to the planning board in April 2017 concerning strategies to promote mixed-use development. Benefits of mixed-use development, of course, include an active urban environment, optimum use of infrastructure, reduced automobile trips, and increased walkability. Staff recommended amending the UDO to allow multifamily development in HB, GO, and CPO to encourage this horizontal mixed-use development. But after further review, staff believes that CPO is not as logical an environment as HB and GO, since it's not located along growth corridors or in activity centers. Removing the uses of duplex and twin home from GB would ensure that this district is reserved for intense land uses. And this district also is mainly found in activity centers and along growth corridors. The HB and GO districts are both fairly intense. Here are some of the uses currently allowed in HB and in GO. Multifamily and commercial uses are already allowed in several zoning districts, business and office zoning districts. Unlimited multifamily density is currently allowed in PB, GB, and MUS. Multifamily development, of course, in any zone requires planning board review. Since HB is already one of the most intense zoning districts, there appears to be little downside to multifamily uses here. GO, also fairly intense zoning district. This map shows where these districts are located in relation to growth corridors and activity centers. And other requirements of these zoning districts, HB allows a building height of 60 feet. GO also 60 feet when adjacent to residential, has no height limit otherwise. Neither HB or GO has a minimum setback requirement in most instances. And because HB and GO both allow land uses that generate more traffic than typical multifamily residential, it's not likely to increase traffic in these areas. Given each district's dimensional requirements, planning staff believes that multifamily development of up to 18 units per acre would be appropriate for GO, and unlimited density would be appropriate for HB. Staff would also recommend adding the townhouse use to make these sites more flexible to develop and encourage a mix of housing types and more affordable housing prices. For comparison, this is what an 18 unit per acre multifamily development looks like in comparison to the type of development currently permitted in the general office zoning district. And to summarize, these changes could encourage horizontal mixed-use development and activity centers and growth corridors, which would protect the integrity and residential character of single-family neighborhoods. Could also encourage more incremental mixed-use development in commercial outparcels and other infill locations. And allowing multifamily in these areas could help redevelopment efforts in vacant suburban office locations, while promoting residential units near employment areas. Outreach has included developers, commercial realtors, the Neighborhood Alliance, neighborhood associations. We've heard some input, which has included requests to increase the proposed density cap on GO from 18 units to unlimited density, and to decrease the standard 40-foot setback between commercial and residential districts. We heard from the Neighborhood Alliance, who sees the potential for new development from this change to be detrimental. We also heard from the Piedmont Triad Apartment Association, who expressed support for this change. And the recommendation is for approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Kelly this time?
Yes, Mr. Bennett, I had a question. Having to do with the dimensional requirements would differ for the multifamily depending upon whether it would be HB or GO?
Correct. The dimensional requirements would be those that carry in that.
That would go with the underlying district?
Right.
Okay. Can you compare that to like multifamily? Is there a difference in height allowed for just residential multifamily versus the 60 feet that you talked about?
Not sure what the...
So the height, if you're in the district standards, the height's going to apply to whichever type of development or building goes in. It won't be different for multifamily versus commercial or office. I mean, it's going to be, that district standard is going to apply throughout the district. Does that answer?
Well, if you did an apartment something that was just zoned for multifamily and was not GO or HB, would there be a height restriction, basically, is what I was wondering.
In like RM12, you're at like 45 foot is the height restriction in like RM12. And it's, as you see in your staff report, in the GO district, you're at 60 foot / unlimited there. So there is a somewhat increase in height there. In HB, in your commercial district, 60 foot or 60 foot unlimited. So there is a little bit more height allowance in some of those districts.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask a question, Mr. Bennett. When you look at this in terms of the tax base and how much tax you're going to get from property, any kind of feel for how much tax you get from residential in that area compared to development of highway business or GO?
We'd have to probably do a little bit more analysis on that. Typically, commercially zoned properties command a higher price per square foot than multifamily. But I'm going to suggest a couple of overarching reasons why we think this is a good idea. I'm going to go ahead and say, I think if you accumulate all the commercial zoning that has happened over the last decades, and the fact that we have vacant commercially zoned land, and we also have land that has stopped being used for commercial, I'd say there is an argument that can be made that we're a little overzoned on commercial. And secondly, I think the more we can add mixed uses into these areas from a neighborhood perspective, I believe when you have a pretty intense HB or GB or whatever district up against neighborhoods, that's a pretty harsh, when you consider all the land uses that are allowed in those districts, that's a pretty harsh change from that to a neighborhood. When you put in multifamily, I believe, and most planners I think you talk to would believe that helps to soften that transition from that zoning district. The third thing I want to mention is from an overall growth management standpoint, the more you restrict where residential, higher density residential can go, you're pushing it somewhere else, and generally that means pushing it outward. If you have the commercial corridor zone for commercial and you don't allow residential in there. So we're adding to the sprawl problem. So I think the idea behind Legacy 2030 is to allow, in districts where it makes sense, allow more mixture of uses which can benefit walkability, it can benefit relation of jobs to work, and it can help soften those districts so that they can be more livable. So those are the reasons behind, I think, what Legacy is saying, and the reasons behind our report that we gave you all last year, and which kind of drove this text amendment.
Let me ask something that I'm trying to look at consequences or the unintended ones that we have when we come up with this, because I think we already have the ability to apply for mixed use. And is there any potential that building residential will force out commercial, and we will lose that walkability to whatever we were trying to get to, those what we used to call neighborhood activity centers, that walkability from residential into the grocery store, the flower store, or the convenience store, whatever. Is there any possibility it could work conversely and be more, I guess, exciting to development to put residential in there, and that would drive your opportunities for retail away?
Well, I think that is one point, that if you shrink the supply of available land zoned for commercial for future commercial development, then at some point when it reaches the saturation point, somebody's going to propose a redevelopment or additional land that's zoned commercial. So yeah, that is a possibility. But what I will also venture to say is that a lot of our commercial commercial zoning is in a strip form along our major corridors. And the more that we can have mixed-use development and, which includes multifamily, the more we're going to make the environment better for transit to come along there with more riders and things like that. And that's one thing I think we have huge shortcomings on in this community is we don't have enough diversity of transportation options. And so if we can add density of housing along these major corridors, then the more we're going to be able to make it work better for public transit in those areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. This is a public hearing. No one has signed up in support of this. Anyone like to speak in support of this? Then we'll turn to the opposition. Diane Fitzhugh.
Good evening. My name is Diane Fitzhugh. I live at 830 West 14th Street, Apartment E, 27105 in the North Ward. I'm here tonight to request your opposition to UDO 283 because it does not support the rights and interests of my community. My understanding is this development ordinance seeks to implement a process by which developers will be able to avoid the cost of a rezoning case, which takes on an average 2 months, resulting for them in additional time and expense to their project, which might ultimately discourage developers from taking such risk. So in effect, to make it easier, faster, and more convenient for profit-seeking developers, this ordinance will eliminate the democratic check and balance system that allows for public hearings to review and question the consequences of such development. It eliminates the resident and other stakeholders' opportunity to voice their concerns about the project's impact on the lives of those living in that community, such as how will this development affect traffic, public safety, schools, and/or the environment. I was told this ordinance will support walkability in new multifamily developments. My question is, walkability to what? More beer bars and outdoor restaurants? What we need in my Boston-Thurman community is walkability to supermarkets or to healthcare facilities. Under the UDO 283, it removes all opportunity for the public to ask for these resources. Rather, it appears that the investors will be given the authority to make their own decisions about what they can do to increase their profits and not what is best for the Winston-Salem community. I'm not asking you to oppose this ordinance because I don't want growth or revitalization in my community. There's nothing wrong with quality, affordable housing or luxury lofts. There's nothing wrong with that small town feel of walking to stores, restaurants, and entertainment centers. But tonight, I am asking you for a continuance or denial because UDO 283 intentionally or unintentionally fails to respect my rights as a tax-paying registered voter to voice my concerns and support for future affordable multifamily housing developments in my community. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Bonnie Kraus.
Good afternoon. My name is Bonnie Kraus. I live at 2001 Boone Avenue in Winston-Salem. Zip code's 27103. I love Winston-Salem. I grew up here. In fact, I grew up in Ardmore. I have a lifelong love of this city, all the trees, the sidewalks, all the things that make it so nice to live in. When I was a child, I carried a paper route to the mobile home park that was at the intersection of Stratford and Knollwood Street. Of course, that's long gone. Change is inevitable. Change is also good. but it's best when residents have some say in how that change arrives. We don't want it to just plop down on us overnight and then have lost our chance to speak up about that. I would fight like a wolverine if somebody tried to come into Miller Park and put up a whole bunch of condos. And even though the specific proposal that brought this before you does not have a direct effect on my neighborhood in Ardmore now, it will if this passes. I'd like to say that I'm not a NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of person. If it's in anybody's backyard and it's unfair, you're going to find me speaking up. The change under consideration is going to do great damage. I want to talk about the intended consequences of this. It is a streamline for development. It is a streamline for investors to select a piece of property and make significant changes to a neighborhood without an opportunity for input from them. We consider a rezoning as sort of a gateway. It's kind of a portal through which projects and changes have to pass and convince a board, an elected board or appointed, that the change they want is good. But this UDO, if it is made, is going to just blow that gate right up into splinters and be used for firewood. It will not actually benefit the residents in these areas. Like I said, change is good and change is inevitable, but there has to be some way for advocates for the neighborhood. The developers and builders, of course, are advocates for their clients, as they should be, but the rezoning process is what gives neighborhoods a voice, neighborhoods and individual residents. So we're talking about growth. We're talking about a gateway being either made stronger or taken away. We want to make certain that no one can just come in and make changes without specific presentations of exact impact and some research. And I realize that's going to cost some money, but it should. Someone shouldn't just come in and say, hey, we just like to do this. What do y'all think? They should be very specific about what they want, and they should then give the neighbors an opportunity to say something about it. Boston Thurman is a great neighborhood. I go through there all the time. It's got wonderful frame-built homes, a lot of some brick ones as well, that could not be replicated today. There'd be no way to rebuild that property. And adjacent to it, I'm sure there is a lot of development that would be pleasing to the residents. I think was mentioned, possible, medical clinic or, walk-in crisis care or something like that for medical stuff. A grocery store. I've worked on, food deserts and that kind of stuff, so I'm familiar with those needs. The injury that would be done, not just to that neighborhood, but in the future, which we may as well anticipate change will come, change is inevitable, the injury that would be done could not be taken back. I still feel very strongly that if someone wants to make a change that significantly impacts any part of our town, they should have to go through a rezoning process individually, one at a time, and make their case, as they have the right to do, that the change they want is one that should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Highsmith?
Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Highsmith. I live at 3335 Anderson Drive, 27127. I'm here today in opposition to UDO 283 on behalf of the New South Community Coalition representing the neighborhood areas of South Winston-Salem. As currently written, UDO 283 is being presented as a means to help jumpstart mixed-use development by giving any developer by right the ability to create horizontal mixed-use development in the highway business and general office zoning districts, effectively bypassing the entire zoning process and public hearings before the planning board and city council. Why should developers have the automatic right to bypass the entire zoning process for creating mixed-use development without permitting any citizen or neighborhood input through the public hearing process? This UDO as written could effectively silence the voice of citizens of Winston-Salem regarding any mixed-use development project possibly impacting their neighborhoods. Without citizen input in any new mixed-use development proposal, there can be unforeseen and destructive consequences to their nearby single-family home neighborhoods, especially since many highway business areas throughout the city are surrounded by single-family home neighborhoods. Plus, there is nothing in this UDO regulating the design, setback, traffic, or environmental impact of such mixed-use development other than permitting a 6-story high-rise buildings to be constructed, effectively disrupting the character and culture of any adjacent single-family home neighborhood community. Our coalition is distressed as to why there have been not been citywide public meetings about this UDO for all of the stakeholders other than just the North Ward, given that this UDO will affect mixed-use development in all of Winston-Salem proper. In conclusion, the New South Community Coalition asserts the following. Number one, that UDO 283 is way too broad and sweeping, basically giving any developer interested in horizontal mixed-use development carte blanche to build or do whatever they desire while bypassing the entire zoning process. Number two, that all horizontal mixed-use developers should be required to go through the entire zoning process when requesting to change any current zoning district to horizontal mixed-use zoning. Number three, that any new planning department recommendations for facilitating horizontal mixed-use development should be written as and under and in particular to the existing mixed-use zoning classification. Number four, that this UDO 283 either be rewritten as a mixed-use horizontal zoning classification, taking out the by right language and keeping the zoning public process, and that this new version be presented community-wide to all stakeholders, where the planning board would need to request a continuance. Otherwise, the New South Community Coalition is requesting that the planning board deny UDO 283 as currently written. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. How much time we have left?
2.5 minutes.
Okay. Snipes? Okay.
How y'all doing?
Good,
I'm Nathan
good.
Snipes, Nathyl, SNIPES. I'm the director of the Housing Summit.
Excuse me, sir, we need to give us your address for the record.
All right,
please,
the
sir.
address is 940 Maryland Street, apartment 54, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27105. Like I said, I'm the director of the Housing Summit, and the Housing Summit comprises of a lot of community development compartments as well. And that's what we're here to voice our concern about. Our concerns is basically about, like I say, that we agree with everybody that's in opposition. The investigation of all county, city officials involved. We want to make sure that if anybody coming to try to do any type of revitalization, we want to make sure that also that that they get a community relationship with the community. We want to know that who's coming to build. We want to check their backgrounds, and that transparency has not been provided. So we're asking for a continuance or either a denial based on these facts. And like I said, the county and city officials. We did our research, and it comes to find out that the county public blanket bond has been expired since 7/1/17. So how many county officials are covered by this public blanket bond? Have they signed off on any documentations that could be null and void based on that finding? And is there any type of remedy for that? Our other one is economic opportunities for the local developers. All right, if we also are approving of revitalization. We also are approving, and that's in our community though, the black community. We also know that there's a demographic thing here in Winston-Salem, and this is why we're here too, because it cuts into our progressive community development projects. We have agricultural projects that we're about to enforce. Sports, entertainment complexes, human resources, medical facilities, community garden, et cetera. I got a short time. And another one is, like I say, the equal housing opportunity. Okay, if we are to replace, if it does get approved and we are to replace, what are the equal housing opportunities, for the residents that you are removing? Another one is like I say, the tax hold. We also have tax hold on historical areas in this community that we grew up in. So it's a lot of, like I say, it's last minute to us, to the community. I'm the director of the Housing Summit. My co-director, is sitting right here, Mr. Elijah Snipes, and we are in agreement with the opposition. And like I say, our own thing is that it conflicts with our progression. We have our own community development plans as well, in which we can incorporate. If you're coming in with community development ideas, and like I say, the research carries out the public and city official bonds. Everybody bonded and everything. The company is bonded. We can incorporate that out of that 100% contract. It evenly gets split with the minority contractors And, you know what I'm saying, the incentives, after taxes, it goes back into the community, organization leaders who provides for the community. Like, it's a lot of transparency and a lot of voids that in 2 minutes I can't get. That's why I'm asking for a continuance, you know, so I can say I can regroup with my community organization leaders. It's just a handful. I have a lot. Like I said, I'm the director of the Housing Summit. This is probably, I have the biggest community organization. I have the largest. Like I said again, I'm Nathan Snipes. These are our, and they're serious concerns, especially with the public blanket bond and these city and county officials. We definitely need to know that no documentation has been signed by officials who weren't properly bonded and lawfully bonded. Nathan Snipes. Yeah.
Okay.
King of the city.
Thanks, sir. That's all the time. Is there someone else here that would like to speak, though? Then we'll declare the public hearing closed. Go into work session.
If I could make a few comments there. One is, I'm not sure if everyone has a complete understanding of how zoning districts and uses assigned to them work, but hardly any of our zoning districts are single-use zoning districts.
The slide back up, it showed the HB.
Right.
The uses allowed by right already in the HB district.
And let me start by even saying single-family zoning districts allow a variety of uses, including non-residential uses.
This is not an exhaustive list, by the way.
Go over to HB. Yeah, this is not the total list of uses, but right now, by right, a piece of land zone HB allows any of those uses. You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to go to a public hearing. They're assigned by right. So changing a use for a property zoned HB, someone has the legal right under our zoning ordinances that have been around for decades to make those changes as long as they meet the requirements of the zoning. So what we're talking about here is adding to that long list of uses there, which would include things like animal shelters, building material supplies, car washes, club or lodge, convenience store, funeral homes, hotels or motels. You go through the list there, adding to those probably dozens of uses the use of multifamily. I would say, you know, any of those uses could potentially be designed very well, just like multifamily can be designed very well. The one thing that multifamily requires in the ordinance that none of these other uses is it requires their site plan to come to the planning board for review and approval. So I think I think to conclude that we're basically doing, I think this is built on an assumption that every change of use should also be a public hearing process, and that is not the way zoning is structured or has been structured. I will say that when you look at kind of the history of zoning, going back to the 1920s, before World War II, most zoning districts allowed for a lot more mixed uses than the zoning districts since World War II. Since World War II, planning, and I talk about planners and government officials and all that, tended to go toward separation of uses. That separation of uses was good, and so you created all these zoning districts and all that. But I think what has been learned in communities that are becoming healthier and all that is that it is good to allow for more mixture of uses, that it's probably better to think about intensity of uses than the strict division of uses one from another. So that's why, for the sake of avoiding sprawl and for the sake of building up walkability and transit and all that, we think that, and the legacy plan that's adopted, and the report that we put together last year suggests that we should be moving toward this, is adding this one use to the several dozen of other uses that I would argue that many of those uses would have a bigger impact on neighborhoods than multifamily.
And I wonder how many parcels in Boston Thurman neighborhood, for example, are already zoned HB or GB?
Well,
do we have that map that?
Do you? I've got this.
We have the map. If that's a closer look, but.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm just looking at, I printed out a zoning map on Geodata, and it looks like HB zoning, you would have to go all the way down to Northwest Boulevard, basically where the Bojangles is. That property is zoned HB. There is some HBS there where the Habitat office is, but that is S. So you couldn't just willy-nilly change uses there without that. You would have to go all the way up to Coliseum, where the new Walgreens is, the new Habitat Restore is, where the Red Cross is, where the little theater is. Those properties are zoned HB that front on Coliseum, and you'd have to go all the way over to Pittsburgh Avenue and Coliseum over across from the fairgrounds to have some HB that fronts on Coliseum there. If you, anywhere between Coliseum and Northwest Boulevard, I don't see any HB zoning or GO zoning.
So there's no impact?
You would have to get property rezoned to go to one of those zoning districts that would allow multifamily. Otherwise, the vast majority of Boston Thurman is zoned RS9 or RSQ. You have some already zoned multifamily zoning east of University on the north side of 13th Street, already developed for multifamily. You have some down at the southern end of Manley Street zoned RM18. Yeah. But otherwise, you're talking RSQ or RS9 or RS7.
Yeah. So it appears to me there's been some real misunderstanding as to what the intent is, because there's not that many properties that could even be impacted. We can continue this. We thought it would clarify anything, but I don't know what.
It does concern me that there is confusion, if that's what you're defining it as, and some other impact that I'm trying to listen carefully for in terms of the difference in intensity of people living there versus these other uses that are in HB and GO. I had mentioned to the board during the planning work session that there was a concern about gentrification in that Boston Thurman neighborhood, and I think this may be what we're hearing there, but from the other speakers, this isn't just one neighborhood issue. And but if you are looking at Boston Thurman, I always consider that Coliseum area and Northwest Boulevard is very much affecting Boston Thurman. I mean, that's the entranceways, and anything that has happened with them or Arbor Acres or Children's Home, the 3 schools that are on there, all affects, not to mention what occurred when University was built through there. So, I mean, there are major impacts on that community that if there's a way to clear up that and get some consensus on this, I would love to see that. And I don't know whether staff feels like there is.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Ms. Highsmith.
What we don't understand is why add it to, you're trying to promote mixed-use development. So why not create a mixed-use development proposal rather than adding it to the HB or adding it to the general office? Because mixed-use development is different from just adding it on to a commercial or highway business or general business or general office area. we don't understand why it cannot be mixed use, where you're asking the developer if they're going to put multifamily dwellings in a commercial environment, why can't the developer ask to have it rezoned for mixed use development? It seems like we're circumventing that, because want to promote mixed use development, so why not ask for zoning for mixed-use development? That's what I don't understand.
Well, I think what I would say is most of mixed-use developments require the assemblage of several parcels of land to put together some sort of a mixed-use plan, whereas this, you could gently add some residential. Is that
right? Well, also, expecting a single developer to do mixed-use development, we found very few takers among developers who do all of that stuff. We have developers who specialize in commercial, and you know from past zoning cases, we've approached those commercial developers, say, we'd like to see you do more residential, multifamily, mix it in here, and the typical response we get is, we don't do that kind of development. That's, we specialize in commercial, and we have had 2 or 3 takers over the last, at least since I've been here, who have zoned their property MUS, but those properties have been very, very slow to develop. So again, we have other commercial zoning districts that do allow multifamily by right. The pedestrian business zoning district, which is one of the most neighborhood-oriented districts, allows multifamily by right.
I guess we just want maximum safeguards, because at least in south end of town, we do have a lot of highway business, little pieces, parcels of highway business that could be bought and added together and create something, and we want maximum safeguards on that type of development. I've been fighting highway business development that's been left over from previous development as the city has gone out to the county, and now we have these potholes of highway business surrounded by neighborhood development.
Wouldn't you welcome then some residential in those highway business districts then?
I'm not opposed to residential and highway business. I'm opposed to the terminology being used by right, meaning that because neighborhoods could be impacted, maybe not all throughout the city, but could be impacted, that we need to have a process that neighborhoods can have some voice in whatever is developed in their neighborhood areas, especially if they're directly adjacent. And this just seems too broad and sweeping to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I just think more dialogue needs to take place, and that all neighborhoods should be invited to a forum where this can be discussed in greater detail, because I think they need more information.
Was the Neighborhood Alliance made aware of this?
Yes. We've got an email from them.
Do they need some more time?
We're always happy to attend a meeting if we're invited, or we can initiate a meeting and invite people to come to it.
Can we make a motion then to continue that so that
Sure.
process can occur? I'll make a motion then.
Second.
Any discussion? Motion to continue 1 month, 2 months, how long? Just
Staff's got to be really involved with this to try to figure out what the issues are and how to address those. So what do you figure it would take?
Paul, you?
Are we in a rush there's nothing pending on this UDO, so.
No.
Yeah.
We can delay it for several months if you want to. It just depends on how much of a extensive process that you all would like us to take and kind of going out to the community. Is it 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3, or is it in different parts of town? Is it
a pretty wide group?
About per ward? Have a meeting in each ward?
I don't believe I'm going to suggest we go have 8 or 10 meetings, but, a meeting.
If you publicize the meeting well enough and you have it in a space large enough for people to attend, why do you have to have more than 1 meeting?
Yeah, I agree with that. So just continue the month, is that what you want to do, or you want 2 months?
Let's try 60 days.
60 days?
Months.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
second?
I think 2 months, yeah.
Any
Second.
discussion on that? All in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. So we'll be back here in December. I'll give us something to talk about. All right. I guess we're to the staff report then.
Okay. Aaron, do you remember what our caseload is coming up for?
We have 40 rezoning cases. And
2 subdivisions, at least 1 PBR. I think that's, I might have missed one, and 1 text amendment, that's Walkertown, so.
Okay. So you'll be getting the materials on that and before sign check on that. For work session in a couple weeks, we're looking at, Aaron is working on a text amendment that relates to commercial building material standards. You'll remember a report that we did for you all last year about smaller scale commercial buildings and making sure that they can be designed and built to be more compatible with neighborhood environments. So we'll be talking about that at work session. We'll be having the limited campus use text amendment there with the Wake Forest proposal and hopefully some reaction from Neighborhood Alliance. They asked for some more time on that. And then something hopefully a little fun is to, some of us have been getting exposed to what changes might be happening in the world over the next 10, 15, 20 years with autonomous vehicles. And what does that mean for our communities? And there's been some interesting thinking done about that. And so while this isn't a hot issue that's right in front of you now, it's something that is good to kind of be thinking ahead. I don't think all the answers are in yet as to what the impacts are, but probably good for all of us to kind of think about that as we're looking long range into the future. So those are among the things that we're thinking about for the work session agenda. And that's it for staff report.
Good. Any board members, anything for the good of the order? Certainly want to express our condolences to Mr. Hicks on the loss of his father, and we regret that happened. So.
Motion to adjourn.
We have our motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Jason.
All right.
Second.